Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Anthony was always a man of integrity and fairness. More than anything else, he valued loyalty. Loyalty to people, loyalty to his favorite business, loyalty to his own principles. After earning his first big money and opening a security agency, Anthony realized that truly loyal people are disastrously few. Once loyal partners betrayed him, smelling even more money elsewhere, and former enemies smiled falsely in the face when they realized that Anthony is now really rich. Even his beloved wife once betrayed the man on one of the most ordinary days. Anthony, unexpectedly returning from a business trip, caught his wife with another man, caught in her own bed. He found her in a way he'd never seen his modest wife before. But the betrayed husband is a soft, cordial, and straightforward man. After a while, he forgave the unfaithful one. His wife, Kelly, was once an orphan and a stranger. Throw her out of the house, she'd have nowhere to go. Anthony managed to find the strength to forgive the woman he once loved, or to forgive her only in words. In any case, it remained a mystery to everyone. However, since that day, the couple's life had changed markedly. No longer could he look into the eyes of his Kelly. No longer could he trust anyone. Since that day, he devoted his life to a new friend, or rather, a dog named Remy. The Cocker Spaniel dog became more than just a pet. He became his loyal friend. The kind of friend he never dreamed of. Anthony. He became his companion. He became his companion. Remy brought together all the qualities that Anthony so desperately tried to find in people. He tried to find loyalty in his friends, in his business partners, in his relatives, in his wife. Who would have thought that all the immense love and loyalty that a man who was already not old enough to dream so much about, he would be able to find in a dog from day one? Taking time out of the kennel, Anthony realized it was fate. From the moment Kelly cheated on her husband, he couldn't even look in her direction in peace, nor could he divorce her. After all, she begged him not to kick her out, and he decided to move to different parts of their large country house. The space allowed. And now Anthony had only one love, one affection, his faithful spaniel Remy. He was not only the man's best friend, he was his ally. Remy made a great hunter, and Anthony had been interested in hunting since he was a child. After all, both his father and even his grandfather were passionate about the hobby. And so the next 12 years passed in love and understanding. Anthony had already retired, but every hunting season he and Remy met in full readiness. Runka was an obedient, loyal dog. He knew many commands. He picked up waltz, spikes, and partridges the first time. He immediately found game and brought it to his beloved master. The last 12 years were the best years of Anthony's life. After all, they had passed together with those a lonely terror rolled down the old man's cheek. "You were my best friend," Anthony said quietly, hardly restraining himself from bursting into tears. "You were my friend, you were my family." He turned away from the small bundle in which the already dead old Remy lay. No longer able to look at his departed friend. There was a lump in his throat. He felt dizzy. "How will I be without you?" he asked quietly. "Ah, it's just a dog." Anthony squeamishly wrinkled Kelly's nose. They buried it as if it were a human being. "Wake up, it's just a dog." She continued to resent it. "You should have loved your wife like that, Anthony." Didn't even turn his head toward his wife. "Get out," he said sternly. "I'm not going anywhere." She continued to resent him. "I want to know what kind of circus you're running here, for God's sake." The older man simply repeated what he had said earlier. "Come out a little louder," he said. "You're not worth half of my Remy. Without making a sin of it, let's just leave the funeral." Kelly rolled her eyes demonstratively. "You're welcome," she shouted and took a quick step toward the exit of the small cemetery, where pets were buried in this expensive village. "Kitty Goss," she lamented to herself, all dancing to his tune while he went crazy. "I wish someone would tell him it's not normal," she thought. Kelly was a solid, well-fed woman. She had met Anthony when she was 25 and he was 28. It probably couldn't be said that Kelly had ever really loved her husband. She probably didn't know how to love at all. After moving to the big city and having nothing but good looks, Kelly went looking for a wealthy man, looking for someone who could provide for her life. Kelly grew up in an orphanage. She grew up in horrible, even inhumane conditions. Maybe that's why she didn't know how to love. Maybe that's why she only saw people as tools for her own ends. Maybe she did, or maybe it was just because she was such a cold, calculating person, devoid of empathy. When Kelly reached adulthood, she sold the room in the communal apartment that she had gotten from the state and immediately invested all the money in her appearance, moving to the big city. Kelly began to search for a husband rich and successful. From 18 to 25, Kelly changed a lot of men, but all of them were not what she wanted. It wasn't until she met Anthony that she realized this was the one for her. Initially, Kelly had a very different goal in mind. A young businessman, owner of a decent business, immediately attracted her attention, and Kelly was already beginning to generalize him. Then his personal security guard caught her eye. Strong, a little clumsy, but very kind guard Anthony. The girl immediately realized this man was a gold mine. Being a calculating person, Kelly was able to see the potential in the guard. She saw immediately this man will succeed, and leaving attempts to generalize the businessman, engaged in his guard Anthony. Kelly had a special gift, namely she was able to easily read the personality of other people and easily copy their behavior, thereby enticing her prey. "Oh, you're a security guard? I love hunting," she said, naively batting her eyes on the first date. "My dream is to marry a hunter. The thick, wild woods. The smell of gunpowder, fresh, hand-caught meat. How I love it all," she said. No wonder Anthony, though in those years he was still just Anthony, fell in love with the young and beautiful Kelly. Thinking she was his destiny, the couple married 6 months after meeting. And 3 years later, Anthony opened his own security firm. Kelly got what she wanted. She became the wife of a rich and successful man. True, from his hobbies and interests, she was literally sick of it. She hated nature, giving her preference to city life, hated long hikes, hated sleeping in tents, hated dogs and birds. She didn't like animals in general. Basically, she hated everything she loved so much. Her husband. However, divorce was out of the question. For the fortune hunter's main goal was not just a rich husband. Her main goal was an inheritance. Kelly hoped that sooner or later Anthony would die. She dreamed of how the unloved spouse accidentally shot on the hunt, and his business and real estate will go to her. She dreamed of an inheritance. But Anthony had no intention of giving his soul to God. So the day Kelly was caught cheating, she fell at her husband's feet, begging him not to leave her. After all, she didn't just have nowhere to go, and was desperately sorry for all the long years she had wasted on Anthony. Anthony forgave his wife, but stopped sleeping in the same bed with her, and for the next 12 years, the couple hardly spoke to each other, only occasionally crossing paths within the walls of the new family member's big house. Kelly hated it with every fiber of her dark soul. After all, it was Remy who now lived in her bedroom. It was Remy who shared a bed with Anthony. It was Remy who had gotten the best benefits. It was Remy who had invested so much time and money, while Kelly was living in her house as a live-in, not a full-time wife anymore. Yes, Anthony did not kick her out of the house, but he had lost all interest and most importantly respect for her. No longer did he look at her with a loving gaze. No longer did he adore his wife. She often wondered if the affair had been worth what her life had become. Cheating, of course, had no answer to that question. In fact, she had been unfaithful to Anthony since the first year of their marriage. Who knew that on that day her spouse would return on time from a business trip? The sense of shame had never entered this woman's soul. It was basically inaccessible to her. Kelly rather lived by instinct. A sense of pleasure in satisfying her needs, a sense of self-importance. That's all. The 3 pillars of her personality. Compassion, love, loyalty. All of those things were nothing to her. All Kelly had to do now was wait in silence for Anthony to leave this world and inherit his legacy. But the man seemed to grow stronger every day. "Idiots, idiots," half-voicedly scolded the predator. Sitting behind the wheel of the SUV, she was heading toward home and could not understand how anyone could run around with a simple dog like that. She couldn't understand why her husband bought expensive toys for the dog. Why he had built a whole enclosure for some dog? It's a dog. He belongs on a leash outside the house. She was indignant as Anthony poured a bowl of clean water for Remy. Let him eat the snow. This attitude toward a simple dog, though quite expensive, was alien and hateful to her. And after Remy's death, when she saw that Anthony was going to give the dog a real funeral, it was beyond her comprehension. What nonsense! She thought with all her might, pushing the gas pedal part of the way down the deserted highway that ran through the dense forest. How much do I hate all this? Meanwhile, the funeral was coming to an end, and the small coffin was already being lowered into the ground. Anthony, though he did not show it, was depressed as he had never been depressed in his life. His soul was torn. His heart ached with longing. Even the day he had learned that his spouse had been unfaithful to him, he had not been in such pain. Though he died his death of old age, the pain of his loss didn't get any weaker. The pain of losing his best friend. That's what the unfortunate man felt. He seemed to be in a delirium. The whole world was a hazy, foggy blur, and he couldn't be in that world all alone. When the coffin was lowered, the workers had already begun to bury the grave. A strong male hand rested on Anthony's shoulder. "I'm sorry," quietly said a man who approached unnoticed. It was Benjamin, a hunter with whom Anthony often went into the field and a good acquaintance. Benjamin, like his companion, loved dogs. He also had his own dog kennel. Benjamin was involved in breeding one of the most beautiful hunting breeds, the Red Irish Setter. His simple hobby and love for dogs led him to his life's work. His kennel was considered one of the. In the country, the pedigree of his dog went far back to the origins of this breed. The dogs from his kennel were true role models. Invariably took prizes at exhibitions and field trials, those who wanted to buy a faithful friend. He had so many that the owner of the kennel chose the buyers himself, conducting tests and various checks. Benjamin was one of the few people Anthony wanted to see at his Remy's funeral. Many of those who attended such an unusual event were surprised, to say the least. Many did not understand the motives of the unrestrained man. Why bury the dog at all? Thought an elderly woman housekeeper living at Anthony's house. They could have just buried it in the woods. The young workers at the security agency owned by Anthony were also surprised. They shifted from foot to foot, embarrassed by the superior's universal sadness. Only fellow hunters, including Benjamin, could understand the unhappy owner. Benjamin cleared his throat. "I understand how much it hurts," he said, still keeping his hand on the hunter's shoulder. "Hold on, thank you," Anthony replied melancholically. "Thank you for coming. Never mind." He waved away, about to leave the small graveyard, as suddenly his companion squeezed his shoulder tighter. "Tell me, Anthony, do you need to talk?" he said with pressure. "The main thing is not to worry about the wife of the woman they know. I have not worried about her for a long time." Just as quietly answered Anthony, stopping to continue the conversation. "It's just that I feel something, that longing. Hopelessness. Not just that." The man smiled indignantly. "When Remy was gone, I felt my life go with him. I know fading away. I can't explain it. Even before I knew for sure that Remy was no longer alive, I felt something so strange, as if my heart had lost something important, as if something had chipped away from it, leaving this world. I feel like I'm only dying after Remy." Anthony's buddy's eyes went wide. "Anthony, come on. It's the pain, the loss. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about." He was embarrassed, adjusting his shirt. "You're not dying, brother. You're gonna be okay. I don't need pity," Anthony replied grimly. "I shared with you how I feel without Remy. I don't see the point of living without him anymore. Oh, how I am without him." Tears froze in his eyes and orphaned him. The man quickly turned away from his interlocutor. He felt that if anyone saw his weakness, it would damage his reputation, bringing him into disrepute. "My dog was a loyal companion. There's no one else like him." "You need a new dog," Benjamin said, nodding his head reassuringly. "Yes, that's right. A loyal, faithful dog." By the way, I have a new addition to my kennel very soon. Many puppies are already booked, but for you, I think I'll single out a male or a female. Which one do you want? One of ours. A bitch is pregnant. She's about to breed. Anthony shook his head at that puppy. He's not gonna be my Remy. No one can ever replace him for me. No offense, brother, think about it. I know what I'm talking about. We're dog people, can't do without our four-legged friends. Benjamin smiled and shook his buddy's hand firmly and left the pet cemetery. Puppy said the word to the man to himself and thought for a moment. A moose pecked at his face. A faint smile. A hand clenched into a fist. Sleep well, my boy, pronounced Anthony, looking at the fresh grave of his dog. Goga motherfucker, you're kidding me, shouted Kelly, 2 months later, not choosing his expression. Another dog. Why? Anthony seemed not to hear his wife, for all his attention was focused on the puppy. A month and a half after Remy's death, Anthony, after careful thought, decided to get another dog. Every day after the funeral, he felt worse and worse. It was as if the once active man was getting older and older. Every day he lost all interest in life. The colors of the world became more and more pleasant and colorless. It seemed to him that he was ready to die. Trying to find the will to live him, and an important decision was made. Puppies to be called Benjamin and arranged for a viewing. Anthony arrived at the kennel of his dog. He saw immediately a very young puppy. It was only 3 weeks old. The unsightly and clumsy puppy had only just opened his eyes and did not know how to do anything at all. According to the kennel's rules, you could only buy a dog when the puppy was at least 3 months old. However, Benjamin knew his mate well. He could be trusted. After another 2 weeks, Anthony Pavlovich was already driving home from his friend, and a new family member was sitting in the back. The puppies had already had all the necessary vaccinations, kennel branding, and even the passport was ready. A little red-haired Irish setter named Mario was now to be Anthony's new best friend. Anthony, damn you. Who the hell am I talking to? The woman continued to be indignant. What the hell is this? Why do you need another dog? The grown and solid man sat up straight on the floor like a small child playing with a puppy. Little Rio wagged his dainty tail merrily and fidgeted in one place as if he were a doll. Anthony laughed, looking the doggy over with a why people palm. He muttered, "Do you know what his full name is? Who are you talking to?" The lady asked irritably, rubbing her nose. "Do you look like a matman? Rio de Janeiro." Anthony laughed, continuing to rub his furry friend behind the ear. "Anthony, what do you want from me?" "Woman." Finally, he turned his attention to his wife. "You got a problem with that. Nobody's keeping you here." Emotionless, he said. Kelly immediately turned from anger to grace. She spoke affectionately. She held out her hand. "How could I be without you? Why are you sulking?" Anthony roughly turned around from his annoying spouse. He got to his feet, taking the puppy under his arm. "Without me," he interjected. "Yeah, I think you'll be fine without a problem." He was about to leave the living room where he had been playing with the puppy, but Kelly blocked his way, not letting him pass. "What are you talking about?" she asked in a thin, high-pitched voice. "You're the love of my life. I've given you all of me." She looked into his eyes as she usually did when waiting. Of course, the cunning woman was lying, as it was already mentioned. The feeling of love, warmth, care for someone other than herself was unavailable to her. It seemed that she was not a woman at all, but just a biological shell, a pretty shell, even at a very advanced age, devoid of feelings, but good at manipulation. "Anthony, I gave you my whole life. I'm not a boy to fall for your flirtations." He turned on his heels and sat down on the couch, putting the dog beside him. "I don't know why you didn't leave then. But remember, I wouldn't mind if you left right now. But how dare you?" She sighed theatrically, clutching her chest. "Oh, heart, aren't you ashamed of driving me to it? I love you, that man, that betrayal. It was a mistake, stupid and insignificant. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." "Lies," exclaimed the infatuated hunter. "You love no one. How can you not be ashamed?" Continue to play on the feelings of the spouse. "It is after all that I have experienced. I have loved you all my life." She paused meaningfully. And besides, where would I go? You know I'm all alone in this world. I have only you and no relatives or friends. But that's nonsense too, Anthony answered her. Couldn't you have gone to that lover? Don't lecture me. He did. I guess I should have divorced you then. I took pity on the poor orphan, and I loved you. The man closed his eyes, tilts his head. Little Rio continued to watch his master attentively, waiting to continue their merry game. Anthony, on the other hand, quietly spoke, Kelly, go mind your own business and leave us alone. I loved you and I love you now. Kelly snuggled up to her husband, sitting down next to him. But why do you need that dog? You have me. And God forbid something happens to you, and what happens to that dog? That's what you were thinking about at the time. I'm not gonna be with him. I'm not going hunting. Anthony, well, let's get him back before it's too late. But what are you missing? Anthony opened his eyes sharply from the curve. Surprised, he asked, do you even know how much that dog is worth? His pedigree, his kennel, his breed, after all. It's all very expensive. And what does that mean? If something happens to you? Kelly, I'm only a couple years older than you. I don't care how much it costs. I don't care if there's a mutt sleeping in your bed outside the store. Don't you dare, quietly said the man Boyles. I'm sorry. Kelly smiled charmingly. Well, why do you need him? Let's get him back. Kelly, get off, roughly answered the man, notwithstanding the pressure of his wife. None of your business. I already told you, if you don't like it, you don't belong here. I'll do what I want. He was silent for a while, daring to say the following. You haven't given me any children. Do you have to love someone? Kelly, shocked by her husband's words, suddenly jumped up from her seat. Oh, and that's after all that I've been through. And for a couple of seconds, hurled a stern look at his interlocutor, then ran out of the living room. Oh shit, the man Kelly cursed. He jumped up and sternly told Rio to wait and followed her leisurely. In the 5th year of their marriage, Anthony began to insist on children. He could not understand why his beloved wife kept refusing. At first, she said that they should live longer in marriage and get to know each other better. But now they had been together for 5 years. Then she said they needed more money to have a child. Anthony ramped up his successful business. Then she said that times are not the same now, and a fortune teller told her that she can't have a baby until she's 35. In general, she refused as much as she could at the moment, when she realized that Anthony would not give up, and if she didn't give birth, he might leave her for someone else. Kelly decided it was time to agree, at least in words. She solemnly announced to her husband that she was ready for children, and the couple began to try to have children. At first, Kelly was sneaky. She took birth control pills in secret from her husband. However, such deception was quickly exposed when once he saw accidentally these pills in her bedside table, as from being made a scoundrel, realized it is necessary to act more radically. Then she finally allowed herself to get pregnant, and drinking the special drug, set up everything so that she had a miscarriage. Of course, Kelly didn't want children. She just didn't want them. She hated them. She realized that she could never love a child, just as she could never love anyone in her whole life. Kelly, sacrificing her own health and the new life that had managed to bud inside her, had faked a miscarriage. To achieve her own goals, she was not spared anything. But what was the result? Allegedly having learned about the miscarriage, Kelly made a real show, wringing her hands, sobbing at the top of her voice, howling, tearing her hair out, never again, screaming her heart out, I'll never do it again. Basically, she did everything she could to make the impressionable Anthony regret cheating and bury the thought of one day becoming a father. She manipulated her spouse as if he were her rag doll. This is how she once again managed to deceive the only man who truly loved her. Kelly, I'm sorry. Out of breath, Anthony said, catching up with his spouse in her bedroom. I'm sorry you miscarried. I wasn't thinking. Of course you didn't. She theatrically put her hand to her forehead. You weren't the one who lost the baby. You dare remind me of the agony, if not the pain. How could you, Kelly? The man moved closer to his wife and hesitantly pulled her into his arms. He couldn't remember the last time he had hugged his wife. Well, I'm sorry to remind you, but it was my baby too. I've been through the same thing you have. "Of course you have," she said indignantly, leaning into her husband's shoulder and smiling victoriously when he couldn't see her face. "It wasn't you who bore him, not you." "Well, I'm sorry," once again the man said. At the same time, Kelly began sobbing loudly, mimicking a cry. Hunter squeezed his spouse a little harder in his embrace. Kelly, on the other hand, smiled predatorily, knowing that he could not see her face. "Idiot," she thought to herself, rejoicing at how lucky her husband was to be burning once again. She continued to sob loudly and desperately, until the following happened. Anthony suddenly in his wife's arms, grabbing her by the heart, and he cried out his heart. The paramedic took the couple wide steps back. "What? What's the matter with you?" Desperately she shouted, victorially clasping her hands and in the heart of vengeful joy, anticipating the subsequent events. My heart was wheezing. The man having already fallen to his knees and collapsed on his side. To me, the doctor in a quiet, frightening whisper said he heart. Kelly, frightened actually by this terrifying and painful scene, rushed was to the phone, as suddenly stopped abruptly. She looked around, remembering which of the servants were at home today. "It was the housekeeper's day off," she said. Quietly, thinking aloud, "The cleaning lady won't be in until tomorrow." She suddenly smiled broadly. "We're all alone in the house. Kelly." Anthony was already losing consciousness, but was still holding on to life. With a last effort of "Will you ambulance?" as hoarsely he squeezed out. "Like hell I did," she replied, smiling wryly. "Who can prove that I saw you lose? And I can't wait any longer, I'm sick of you. All I want is your inheritance." She laughed wickedly. "And you wrote my will to someone else, didn't you?" "Yes, and to whom she would have grinned," she added. "You have no one else but that dog. Everything will go to me at last." Anthony, realizing that he was dying, gathered the last of his strength and quietly answered deceitfully. "So that's what it turns out to be. Your inheritance is ready. Rio." That's when Anthony let go of the spirit and the name of the red puppy. It was still on his lips. Kelly and the new challo along the deserted forest road. Upbeat music could be heard from the speakers. A bloodthirsty smile froze on the criminal's face. She was wearing wide sunglasses. A black silk scarf was tied on her head. The woman couldn't believe her happiness. "Finally, for so many years I have waited for this moment. For so many years I thought it was a crazy lady." And she was reading to us on the highway, practicing a complicated speech. Her husband had finally died in her arms. And in fact, she's the one who finished him off. She's the one who didn't call an ambulance. She gave him a heart attack with her tears and tantrums about the child she killed. The cause of death turned out to be just such a massive heart attack. Of course, if help had been rendered in time, Anthony could have been saved. But that was not part of Laura's devious plans. And now that Anthony's funeral was settled, it was time to do what Kelly had dreamed of all the years of their marriage. It was time to deal with the inheritance. She drove to the notary, rehearsing how she would sob uncontrollably, playing on the pity of those around her. She was already approaching the appointed place when she suddenly remembered that she wasn't entirely alone in the car. "Right," she exclaimed. She braked sharply. There was a sharp squeal of brakes, and Kelly swerved off the highway, stopping on the side of the road at the fork in the road. She turned around to the back seat. "You hissed," she hissed, pointing a finger with a long purple nail at the small, puzzled huff of this puppy. The doggy tilted his head to the side, of course not understanding what was going on after his owner disappeared to an unknown destination. He decided that this woman was now his main mistress. He bobbed his thin tail happily, not expecting anything bad to happen. Kelly did not stop, as if she wanted to unleash on the unconditional creature all the emotions that she could not express before Anthony. "You shit all over my house." She was cursing at the poor dog. "You nasty, stinking dog. I'm not going to let you ruin my happy new life." With those words, she leisurely got out of the car, opened the back door, and held out the puppy's long, cold, manicured hand. "Baby, Rio," with no backward thought, smiled at his mistress. He was excited, figuring they would go for a walk now. They had been on car rides like this before with the old master. True, he spoke better, calm and affectionate, but he too would put him in the back and open the door to let him out into the woods. Oh, if this little guy only knew what was waiting for him now. Cruel Kelly, without a drop of regret, grabbed the puppy by the scruff of the neck and threw it with a swing into the grass near the secondary road. Then, shaking her hands squeamishly, she sat back in the car, and before the doggy could realize anything, she stung the gas pedal with all her might. The 2-month-old puppy was left all alone. At first, he thought it was such a fun game and Fuck rushed after the departing cars, but it was all for nothing. He was exhausted and yapping pitifully. He wandered quietly along the highway, abandoned and unwanted. Kelly at the same time turned on the loud music in the cabin and cheered. At last, she had managed to get rid of all those who were in her way so much. Oh, what happiness! She was already approaching her destination, not yet knowing that her grand plan was unlikely to come true. Many things. A lot of things didn't come out as easily as they seemed at first glance. But the boy raised his blonde eyebrows in surprise. "Mom, look what's so cute," asked the boy's mom, without taking her eyes off the road. "You know, you can meet deer here. The forest is just around the corner. Look carefully, Thomas. No, look, I think there's a dog." The boy kept pointing out the window. "Mom, he's all alone." "Why is that?" "Let's stop." The woman behind the wheel slowed down, pulling over to the side of the road. Squinted. She followed her son's directions with her gaze. "Wow, how small," she said with surprise. "Is he lost?" The boy asked in surprise. "We have to help him." "I don't know," replied the boy's mother. "I guess he really is lost." She pulled away from the curb and cautiously drove closer to where the trembling red puppy was sitting. God, he was so tiny and so cute. He must have a collar. With those words, the woman got out of the car. Her son Thomas, 10, jumped out after his mother. He skipped briskly toward the puppy, but when he saw that the little one was frightened and brought to the ground, he stopped. "He's scared," whispered the boy. "Of course he's scared. Don't scare the little one." The young mother began to walk slowly toward the puppy, holding out her hand to him. "Don't be afraid, little one. We want to help you," she said affectionately. Little Rio looked puzzled and incredulous at these strangers. At first, he wanted to run away, but then, realizing something for himself, he made a careful and slow step towards these unknown people. A thin tail, clamped between his trembling hind legs, stuck out and weakly returned. On this very roadside, the little fellow had already spent several hours. For the first time, he didn't understand at all what was going on. He tried to catch up with every passing car, to see if his mistress had returned, but it was all in vain. He seemed to be all alone in the world, abandoned first by his master and then by his mistress. Frozen and hungry, he was too young to take care of himself. He took another step. He was not to be abused, then another and another. And now he was already cautiously securing the hand that was held out to him. It smelled very nice, much better than the old mistress's, or even smelled like a horrible, strong, synthetic scent. This soft hand smelled like something herbal and still tasty. "I guess she's not his enemy." "Well done." The woman praised the dog, smiling. "Now let me see your collar." She gently took the baby under her breast, lifting him into her arms. He cried out softly, but when he realized he was in no danger, he accepted the fact that he was being probed. The young woman twirled the collar in her hands. Nothing, just a regular collar, but a rather expensive leather one. There was a little hard capsule in the middle with all the phone numbers. No address to take the puppy to. She carefully removed the collar, in case there was some information on the other side. But alas, it was still the same, nothing but a small engraving. The woman raised her eyebrows. "Rio de Janeiro," she read, the only thing written on the collar. "What does that mean?" she asked her son. "Is he a Brazilian?" The boy couldn't stand by any longer, took a wide step towards the child. He slowly held out his hand to the baby for a sniff, as Rio acknowledged the stranger and realized that this one was no threat to him either. And what's more, that he was a human puppy too, cheerfully assured with his tail. Little Thomas was absolutely thrilled. He began, 3-5 fluffy behind his long ears, gently stroking his smooth head. "Ain't mama, what Brazilian? That's his name. Rio de Janeiro. Rio, And Rio's short for Rio, he's definitely called Rio. Look, he's responding. You're probably right, Thomas's mom said thoughtfully. But what are we going to do? He's freezing. His owners are probably already looking for him. With longing in his voice, said the boy. How did he get so lost? The woman raised her head, and she was silent for a few seconds, and then answered her son Thomas, I think he is not lost. What then? Asked Thomas, continuing to stroke the dog, who was already cozy in the arms of the woman. How did he end up here? I think he was abandoned. With bitterness in her voice, she replied. Abandoned. The boy asked indignantly, how could that be? Who could do such a thing? He's just a little boy, such a beautiful red-haired mommy. We'll take him for ourselves. For ourselves. Surprised asked the woman, honey, but we have no room for a dog. Besides, I don't know what breed it is. Suddenly he's washing into a huge dog, and we don't have much money. The boy tilted his head dreamily to the side. Yes, he stretched out as if not hearing his mother's arguments. He will definitely grow up and be big, big will protect us. Mommy, but we can't leave him here. He's gonna be alone. Oh, you're right, honey, the woman replied quietly. Of course we'll take him with us. Doria was a young single mother. She had separated from her father Thomas before she could even marry him. He left her when she was 7 months pregnant. Doria was a very kind woman, intelligent, beautiful, and incredibly capable. After graduating from school with a gold medal, becoming a real pride of her family, she entered one of the best universities in the country, dreaming of becoming a veterinarian. Her parents were proud of her. School teachers prophesied a bright future, and even friends marveled at how one person could combine both beauty and an incredible sharp mind. All in all, Doria grew up first as a wonderful child, and then as a hopeful teenager. And finally, she grew up. A beautiful and intelligent woman. Many around her were convinced that this person was capable of much. The first year at the institute went smoothly. Doria found it easy to study. Relations with classmates were just great, and she even had time for fun. So inherent in youth and personal life, this very life was beating key. One day, he appeared in her life. This was the name of the man who spoiled the whole life of a young, excellent, and beautiful girl. The guys met in the hall of the university, where the young man came to pick up his documents after expulsion. Word for word, smiles, light flirtation. And now Doria is already curling her long, light blonde hair. Preparing for the next assignment, her friends, having found out with whom she was going to meet, twisted their fingers at her temples. He's a jerk, the students lamented. You'll never work out. He's not right for you. They discouraged her, but Doria didn't care about public opinion. Something about David. There was something in him that Doria herself lacked. Freedom from conventional frameworks, boldness, and absolute rejection of the structure of the world. That's what attracted her. Good girls, unfortunately, are always drawn to the bad guys. David was expelled from the second year of study for failure, but he didn't seem to care at all. High school doesn't mean anything, he assured his new girlfriend on their first date. I and without education much to achieve, he said. The young people started dating. Their relationship developed rapidly, and here on New Year's vacation, Doria was on her way with her beloved to her hometown to introduce him to her family. The parents of the girl were in complete shock. Mitri turned out not at all who they would like to see next to their daughter. His long hair was gathered in a neat bundle, all his hands in strange tattoos, and between the eyebrows there was a piercing. David's mom, when she saw her daughter's boyfriend, grabbed her heart. Her father didn't bother and just threw them out after he made some unpleasant remarks about their modest home environment. Doria sobbed, unable to remember herself from grief. For what? What had he done to you? Angrily, she asked her parents. He's not at all what he seems at first sight. But her mother and father held their position, strictly forbade her to meet this young man, which awakened in Doria a real rebellion. If you do not accept my David, then you are no longer my parents. She shouted in her heart the girl's father, having decided that soon she would realize who she had messed with. Glumly replied, well, that means that you are no longer our daughter. Doria lost her parents overnight. She cut off all contact with them, preferring her lover to her family. The girl returned to the hostel with mixed feelings. Resentment choked her, but it was too late to retreat. She stopped communicating with those friends who were against her David. David himself forbade her to communicate with some of them, and many of them cut off all contact with Daria. When Daria found out who she was dating, sometimes it seemed to Daria that the whole world was against them. Against her, against David, against their relationship. She didn't know how to go on, but she knew one thing for sure: no one could ever separate them. Another 6 months went by like that, and here Daria, having quarreled with absolutely everyone, decided to move out of the dormitory and start a life together with David. The student moved to live in the apartment of her beloved A. He lived quite differently than he had described to her earlier spacious apartment of his own. In the center of the city turned out to be a modest one-room on the outskirts, and instead of the promised housekeeper together, with David lived his grandmother, an old woman, about 90 years old. Daria, suffering from dementia, was in complete shock when she saw the conditions that life had prepared for her. Wouldn't the hostel be better? She asked herself, but it was too late to back out. It was not for nothing that she had completely abandoned her surroundings for David. Dina moved to her beloved, hoping for the best. After all, he promised to achieve incredible success. We'll get through this, she thought, but we're together. And let the whole world see what our love can do. After moving into her boyfriend's apartment, the student began to clean it up. She removed dusty 100-year-old wall carpets, washed the curtains, threw out all the junk that Wendy had collected over the years. Grandmother David increasingly Daria skipped classes more and more. Often Daria preferred domestic chores to studying. Daria got so into the role of a housewife that she even got used to the fact that Wendy's grandmother lived with them. She was quite a sweet old lady, at least as long as she didn't scare with her sleepwalking at night and strange behaviors. She'd leave the gas on, open the window wide open in the cold. The life of a young, promising girl slowly began to fade. She had already completely abandoned her studies. Her mood was more and more often floating at zero. She seemed bored with everything. David didn't seem so rebellious and rather an infantile singer. And even Wendy turned out to be an unusual grandmother, but a crazy old woman. Everything that Daria had fantasized about David turned out to be false. It turned out that he was expelled from the institute, not because he was carried away by a promising job on the side, but because he was simply lazy. And even the money on which the guy took his beloved to cafes and movies was not his income. It was his grandmother's pension. More and more often David did not appear at home. More and more often young Daria spent her evenings in the company of Wendy, cleaning up the mess the mad woman was making. Of course, kind Daria did the best she could and felt sorry for Wendy and tried to make her well. Inviting doctors home, and even washing the old lady in the bathtub and brushing her tangled hair. That day, when Daria, who had already lost patience and was tired of this life, was about to leave, a photograph caught her eye. It was a very old photograph. It had fallen out of the closet when Daria was packing her things. Daria looked at the photo and marveled. There was a picture of herself in the photograph. Yes, that's right. Wendy, only a very young, beautiful, laughing woman. She was holding some kind of miraculous apparatus and was wearing a white robe. And from the inscription on the back of the photo, Daria was surprised to realize that the old woman, suffering from dementia atheism, had once been a leading researcher with a PhD. Digging through the box from which the picture had fallen out, Daria learned a lot about Grandma Wendy's past. She had once been a prominent member of society, beautiful, intelligent, and self-reliant. The girl's heart clenched with pain and resentment for the old lady. Did she deserve such a life? That day, Daria never made up her mind to move out from David. She waited for the young man and had a serious conversation with him. Daria insisted on treating Wendy's grandmother. After all, she'd once been a well-respected woman. Did she deserve to have her own grandson take her pension? She deserved all of this. Why was the only person who had anything to do with her now was a girl who was a stranger to her? A girl whose name she couldn't remember and whom Wendy used to scare. Every time she went into the kitchen and thought she was a thief, Daria insisted that David should go to work. and on Wendy's good pension to look for a boarding house worthy of her, where the elderly are kept in cleanliness and comfort. But the indifferent David only lazily waved it away. Daria insisted, and then he got really angry. "Aha, you're so clever," he shouted angrily. "For her looks. How am I supposed to live then? Her doctor's pension is my main income. Do you know how she behaved when I was a kid? No, then mind your own business. She ain't going to no goddamn boarding school. Let her stay at home, she ain't got much time left anyway. To smoke the sky." Daria was in complete shock at what she had heard, because David's parents had died when he was a teenager. Wendy had no other relatives. Daria had grudgingly stayed in the apartment for the sake of Wendy's grandmother. Now she has completely abandoned her studies. She takes care of the infirm old woman. And after another 6 months, Daria unplanned got pregnant. Seeing 2 stripes on the test, she froze in place and did not feel anything at all. On the one hand, she had always thought that children were happiness. On the other hand, Daria wasn't at all sure what David would make of her. A good father. The unfortunate woman was floundering, not knowing where to put herself. Defense, of course, was out of the question. But what should she do? The confused student decided to call her parents first. The girl's father, having learned that his daughter is expecting a child. From this, David came to full fury. "Don't you dare have a baby with that asshole," he yelled into the phone. "You'll give birth to an imbecile like him. And then you'll forget about us forever." That day, Daria realized that there was nowhere to wait for help. She waited for David and told him the latest news. But he only lazily waved away his chosen one, and then ate the dinner she had prepared. He smirked cool on an exhalation, he reported. "What does that mean? Are you entitled to any benefits now?" "Yes." With her head, the girl realized that there was no hope for change in her young man at all. The young heart continued to believe it. Will he change when the baby is born? With a huff, she thought, a baby will make him a better man. Meanwhile, David found out that a single mother's allowance would be more than a married mother's, and plans for a wedding had to be canceled. Under the judgmental and curious stares of former fellow students, Daria hurried to the dean's office. She had come to do something that no one expected her to do: to take her documents from the university without graduating. Growing up, sticking her neck out, she came to dispel the myth that good girls never get into trouble. Former classmates at first did not even recognize in the stranger her Daria, taking her for someone's mother the surrounding murmurs. The most insolent ones were laughing and pointing their fingers, and David's name was repeatedly heard. She ignored the gossip. With a proud head, she took her documents and left the institute for good. Now a new life awaited her, an adult, family life. But since there was very little money in the newfound family, yesterday's students had to go out to work. Unfinished higher education did not give any advantages, and without experience they didn't take them anywhere. So poor Daria had to go wherever there was any money to be made. A dishwasher in a cafe. She invested the money she earned in the needs of her future child, buying all the things necessary for him, and saved the rest for a decent old age for Wendy. David, for his part, was not investing in any way. He almost stopped showing up at home. And at some point, Daria was horrified to discover that the money she had set aside had begun to disappear. When she called her future spouse for a serious talk, she learned a terrible thing. David suffered from mania, and almost all of Daria's earnings went to gambling. The heart of the future mother was shattered. She didn't know how to go on living. Her parents abandoned her. She had no friends left, and the man for whom the promising student gave up her future betrayed her. Or rather, not even so simply turned out to be completely different from the one whose image she drew in her amorous imagination. That's all, banal and bitter. Daria would like to leave him now, but her caring heart clenched with pain for Wendy. How could she be without her, 7 months pregnant? It was all decided by chance. One winter's evening, David didn't come home alone. Next to him was a young and pretty girl who embarrassingly hid her eyes. David proudly announced that he was in love, and in a rude way, asked Daria to move out the same day, so Daria had to leave the place she used to consider her home. Abandoned by everyone, a lonely loner. She just didn't know where to go if it wasn't for the baby. What was the young mother carrying under her heart? Daria would probably have given up, but for the sake of her baby, she gritted her teeth and fought on. A couple weeks later, at the not-so-educated ex-girlfriend's house. Luck smiled on her, and Daria met a married couple who were on the lookout for a live-in housekeeper. She had found them through the classified ads. These kind people took the pregnant girl in, giving her a job and shelter. Daria worked in the sweat of her brow, with no memory of rest. The life she created for herself now, after 10 years of almost continuous labor, was achieved through pain and tears. And then she gave birth to a healthy baby boy and named him Thomas. And all these years she raised and educated him alone. She managed to get out of the hole into which the once young, desperately in love student had fallen. Of course, David's situation is not brilliant now, but she can still afford to rent a decent apartment and have a car to support herself and Thomas. What's life like? Far from ideal, of course, but Daria is happy to have what she has. She never made peace with her parents. The resentment against them was too strong. And what was expected? Some nothing is unknown. He didn't even answer the incoming call when the young mother called him from the maternity hospital. Daria was deprived of the future that everyone around her had so long and persistently prophesied to her. She had chosen her child over her own blood. Maybe someone will find her actions silly, or maybe someone will recognize in them themselves or their loved ones, and at least mentally support this young, selfless mother. In any case, David's life was the result of her actions. She never got a higher education and a prestigious job, but now she had more than money. David had a healthy and well-behaved son. She worked in a veterinary clinic, just as she had once dreamed. Of course, she didn't manage to become a doctor, but the vacancy of an administrator was quite accessible to her. And now in their lives there was a puppy, a small, and without a nice creature, which also needs support and protection. Maybe Daria will still find her happiness. Anything can happen. Who knows? The door to the apartment swung open and a happy Thomas ran inside, waving his arms happily. "We have a dog." "Yay, dog," he shouted with joy. "Mom, where is he gonna sleep? Can he sleep with me?" "Oh, please," the boy made a funny grimace. "Oh, Thomas, but don't get ahead of yourself," stopped the uncontrollable joy of the child's mother. "He still needs to get used to us, We'll find a corner for him now." With these words, Daria slowly lowered the puppy she had been holding in her arms to the floor. Little Rio froze fearfully in place in front of him. He looked around uncertainly and trotted forward by his tail. "Oh, he's so fast," Thomas said excitedly. "Mom, how old do you think he is?" Daria frowned. "Oh, I don't know. Honey, this is the first time I've seen this breed of dog. I think he's still very young. No more than 2 months, 2.5. How much work do we have to do with him?" That's how little Rio settled in with David and Thomas and became a full member of the family. He seemed to grow by leaps and bounds. Growing bigger and smarter every day, Daria was not wrong in saying that the family still had a lot to look forward to. Rio turned out to be a real tomboy. He ran around the apartment like a bullet, demolishing everything in his path. Outside on a walk, Rio kept all the pigeons in the neighborhood busy when he saw birds. His funny face changed immediately, becoming more serious and attentive. In addition, Daria learned to toilet train the baby. In general, the family's life became much more complicated, but much brighter and fuller. One day, Daria found out that the collar they found Rio with was too small for him. She started looking for a new accessory on the internet, all the while mindlessly twirling the small collar in her hands. Maybe she should give it to someone. Daria was about to place an order from the store for another rogue behavior, a bag of food. I couldn't resist adding a toy for Rio. Suddenly, something caught her eye. That capsule she'd noticed the first time she'd met Rio. It seemed she wasn't so simple. Daria spun it around in her hands, frowning slightly. "Thomas," she called to her son from the other room. "Thomas, come here." The boy was immediately at his mother's side. In his hands dangled a puppy, obviously quite tall. After their recent walk together, his eyes were closing and his paws hung limply, letting the world know how tired he was. Thomas held the baby carefully with both hands and glanced unhappily at his mother. "What's the matter? Can't you see I'm busy?" Daria laughed warmly. "That's interesting," she clarified. "How what?" the boy asked indignantly. "I was putting Rio to bed." "Honey, he's not a baby." Laughing, she replied. "He doesn't need to be put to bed. He's doing just fine on his own." "He should be," Thomas said resentfully. "Why did you call me?" "Right." Daria took the capsule off the collar and slipped it into her son's hands. "Look at this thing," she said thoughtfully. "Don't you think it's strange?" Thomas laid the puppy down on a nearby couch and took the capsule in his hand with a smart look. He twirled it around for a long time until there was a strange sound, and the capsule opened in two. The boy looked fearfully at his mother, and I didn't want to break it. "It's okay, honey," the mother smiled. She bent down to put the capsule back together as she suddenly noticed a small rolled-up piece of paper on the floor. That's what she held out. "What's that?" What is it?" asked Thomas. "Mom." He suddenly grabbed his mother's hand before she could open the paper. "Mom, wait. What is it?" Daria asked. The boy looked longingly at his mom. In a quiet voice, he began. "What if this piece of paper has an address to the address of Rio's former owners? It's not like we're going to get it back. They do now." Daria hesitated for a moment. In fact, she hadn't even had time to think about what could be stored in this capsule. What if the address of the former owners had indeed been found? Goosebumps ran down her spine. It turns out it should have been returned to its owners long ago. But Thomas, the boy, is so attached to the baby, and in general. What kind of owners would leave a puppy by the highway? Daria shook her head decisively. "No, Thomas, that dog is ours now and no one else's." She replied confidently. If the former owners cared about the puppy, they wouldn't have left him out on the street to freeze. "Yes," Thomas answered cheerfully. "You're right, Mommy." "What's the matter with that piece of paper?" he asked impatiently. Daria finally unfolded the paper too. She was ready for different options. But what she saw inside only added more questions. 591490. She read the note. "And that's it?" she asked upwards and shrugged, perplexed. "What kind of a set of numbers is that? It doesn't look like a phone number." "Thomas, what do you think?" The boy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe it's his personal number or something." "What do you mean?" she asked. "What other number?" "I don't know what number. Just a number that's his personal number. Like that branding he has on his tummy." "You think so?" Daria said thoughtfully. "I guess you're right." "I'm sure," the boy answered proudly. There came a savory sneer from him with a downpour. Thomas and his mom instantly turned around to the source of the sound and found an already awake Rio. Happy, joyous, but still sweetly howling. Oh man, Thomas was indignant. "We woke him up and now we have to put him back to sleep." He took a couple of steps toward the puppy, but the little one jumped up playfully, falling onto his front legs and leaping off the couch, barking cheerfully. A few seconds later, the two fun-loving boys and the puppy were already rattling the apartment, chasing each other and knocking over everything in their path. Rio was running around the apartment like he didn't know what was wrong at all. It's fatigue. He swung himself up under the couch, jumped inside a basket of dirty laundry, pissed off, pretending to growl at Thomas and clinging with his sharp lips to his clothes. All in all, the couple was having as much fun as they could. Daria laughed merrily, looking at them, and was unable to even pretend to swear. Finally, she placed the order from the store, stood up from her computer desk, and stretched. To hell with that number, she thought to herself, but for some reason she didn't decide to throw away the hidden capsule, along with that strange piece of paper. Instead, Daria put the capsule back together, putting the number inside, and headed for the large closet to put the find away. Daria searched with her eyes for a long time for a place to hide the strange item. She once again had time to think, why not just throw it away? But some unknown force stopped her again. Daria reached for the top shelf of the closet with her hand, found the box where her jewelry was kept, put the capsule and the note inside, and put the box back upstairs. After a couple of minutes, she forgot about the strange find. At the same time, on the other side of the city in the notary's office, there was an unusual, and even a little frightening dialogue. "What the fuck is the number?" shouted the spittle-spattered Kelly. "Can you explain what it is?" "Kelly? I don't know myself." Calm, placating. The tone was answered by a personable young fellow, an assistant notary. "I'm just telling you what the document says." The angry lady, irritated and tiredly, ran her palm across her face. "I need more information." Through gritted teeth, she sneered. "I'm explaining to you. I don't have that information." Slowly boiling over, replied the employee. "Just accept the fact that based on the last will of the deceased, inheritance was not intended for you." Kelly's face turned purple, her hands shook, her eyebrows drew together over the transfer and day. "How dare you?" she began in a quiet tone. "Who are you, anyway, to talk about my deceased husband? Actually, I am his lawful wife. Respected." The guy sighed patiently and, improving the moment while she wasn't looking at him, rolled his eyes. To receive the inheritance of Citizen Volushin, or rather the overwhelming part of the inheritance mass, namely money, the heir must provide a certain numerical code number. If you want, either remember this number or look for it somehow in the things of her husband, or either that the widow angrily splashed her hands and kicked me out of here. You have no right. Kelly was silent for a moment, and then there was a noticeable change in her face and lips. She smiled benevolently, which seemed especially creepy in contrast to her previous mood. Did her eyes sparkle with a greedy gleam? She changed her face instantly. Anger was replaced by coquetry. Even the widow's voice changed when she asked, "So you know the number?" "What?" The employee was outraged, involuntarily making a repulsive gesture. No, of course not. He wanted to leave the meeting room where he was having the conversation with this tired of left customers, but stopped to say, "Yes, even if I knew, I would not tell you, at least, because I have no right to do so. And at most, because what rights are you talking about?" Suddenly, his assistant was interrupted by his voice. A mediocre boss. In the spacious office appeared the one with whom Kelly had spent the most time in recent months. The notary himself, the notary to whom the late Anthony always referred, a solid man, smiled broadly at his client and looked at his assistant with disapproval. "What are those tones, Benjamin?" Gently but menacingly he asked. "You can't talk to a lady like that." "Yes, of course." The boy sneered and did not continue the dialogue. Under the stern gaze of his boss, he left the meeting room embarrassed, throwing one last disgruntled look at the nasty client. The notary guiltily smiled. "Forgive my assistant. He is still too young. Let's please go to my office." Kelly is getting annoyed. Fidgeting harder and harder, she nodded her shoulder. "We come on," she replied confidently and walked forward. When the office door closed, she, deciding not to be ceremonious, got straight to the point. "What is this number?" she asked angrily. "Can anyone explain it to me clearly? I can't get my inheritance for a month. I'm going to sue your office. Mark my words." The lawyer smiled broadly, holding back a laugh. "Go ahead, Kelly. Don't be shy. But on what grounds are you going to sue us?" "Tell me, please, on what basis?" she asked irritably. "On the grounds that you're withholding my inheritance? That's a crime. Everyone knows that my husband was a rich man. You think I don't know how much money we're talking about? Of course, you decided to keep my inheritance for yourself. Cheaters." The notary shook his head. "I knew your husband well. He was not only rich, but also incredibly honorable. That's one thing. Secondly, the certificate of inheritance is issued after 6 months from the date of death. As much as I'd like to, I can't give you access to the inheritance, as you put it, until that time has passed. You've applied for an inheritance. Now, by law, we must wait for all other interested parties, if any, to do the same. And finally, who gave you reason to believe that your late husband's estate should go to you?" In a split second, the restless woman was next to the notary's desk and cracked her fist on it with a rumble. "And who the hell do you all think you are?" she shouted. "What the hell, and to whom? If not me, I'm his lawfully wedded wife. To whoever gives you the secret number as stated in Anthony's will." The notary answered calmly. "I've told you so many times. Don't you remember? You, of course, are also due a marital share of the property acquired during the marriage and available at the time of the death of the testator. Once the statutory period passes, then we'll see what and how to distribute. Kelly seemed to almost explode, literally. What kind of nonsense is this? She asked, looking up, wondering when he'd even gotten around to making that weird will. He had a heart attack. Suddenly, he couldn't know he was going to die. How is that possible? Everything is possible, the notary answered firmly. In general, wills and make mostly in advance, prudent. And people, of course. And your husband, undoubtedly, was such. But let's return to the subject of our little discussion. You found out the number. Did Kelly throw up her hands? No, I did not. But you said there was something else. Wasn't there? In addition to the number, you have to provide some proof. What kind of proof? Oh my God, she rolled her eyes. Remind me, please. You must prove that you took care of the Brazilian. The notary smiled slyly. That's all I have to say to a person claiming an inheritance. You must give the right number and provide the very same Brazilian, whoever he is and whatever that means. Only then will you have access to the safety deposit box that holds the bulk of the deceased's estate. Until then, you are quite welcome to use what your late husband left to you personally, namely the apartment he left to you, and the house in the Star. Kelly. In fact, the house does not belong to you now either, the notary replied. But as long as the other heirs have not claimed it, you can stay in it for a while. The woman laughed nervously. Look, was he even in his right mind? When he made that damn will, I think he was out of his mind then. Putting his dogs to bed with him, giving them funerals. That's what he did for the last few years of his life. She glared and turned around with angry eyes to leave. Have a nice stay. The lawyer, after waiting until the lady was in the doorway, said quietly to himself under his breath, You know, Kelly, I have a feeling that Anthony's death has something to do with you. I don't know how, but I'll try to find out. From that day on, the notary and part-time good friend of the deceased Anthony began his investigation. Who knows where it will lead him? The angry widow was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So many years and all for nothing. Desperate, she thought. It turned out that Anthony did suspect something. He'd written such a convoluted will. Her emotions were running high. Her heart was racing. I wanted to go out and strangle someone with my own hands. Preferably that nasty red dog she'd unfortunately dumped by the roadside. Who knew it could come in handy? Rio? No Rio. Gasping, Daria shouted, coming down in pursuit of her four-legged friend Rio. Stock girlfriend and the young handsome dog only turned around at the call of his mistress. But nature's call was many times stronger. Standing still. For a few seconds, Rio decided that a passing bird is more important than David's call, and throwing a guilty look at his mistress started running. Stop, stop. The young mother was already visibly tired and unable to run anymore. She stopped on the spot, resting her palms on her knees to catch her breath. What kind of dog are you so annoyed with? She exhaled. The older Rio got, the harder he became to handle. At home, the dog behaved much more calmly than he had as a puppy. But outdoors, every time he saw a big bird, he was out of control. Otherwise, everything was fine. Little Rio grew into an adult, very handsome and intelligent dog. Perhaps the problem was his special intelligence. He understood too well everything that was going on around him. That's why he sometimes allowed himself such pranks, like today. Having analyzed the situation, he decided that catching up with the bird was more important than obeying his mistress. This peculiarity of the dog added a lot of problems to Daria. Rio was so fast that it was impossible to catch up with him. But now Daria knew that this behavior was just a peculiarity of her dog's breed. She found out at the clinic where she worked. They were talking about the employees' pets, and Daria decided to check with the doctor about something concerning Rio. Martin, I was wondering. You see, Thomas and I just recently got a dog, but something just struck me as odd. I thought maybe you might know something about it. I'm listening interested, the doctor replied, and stepped forward onto the counter. Congratulations, by the way, a new member of the family. That's great. What breed is it? May I ask? If I knew, I would love to tell you, she guiltily smiled. We found him on the road. Can you believe someone left a baby all alone on the highway? He was so small. He didn't look more than a month old. I don't know what kind of breed he was. But from a baby, our Rio was already a big dog. She proudly squared her shoulders. Yes, it is an interesting dog, though not obedient Rio. The man laughed good-naturedly. Interesting name. Did you come up with it for him? I don't know about that. We didn't come up with the name. The puppy had a collar with Rio de Janeiro engraved on the other side. We decided to call him Rio. And on that collar, there was some kind of capsule. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. I don't know what kind of gadgets they come up with. But when my son and I took a closer look at this capsule, we found a note inside it, and in the note some number. I don't know what to think. It seems nothing unusual, but I can't get these numbers out of my head. The doctor thought for a moment. He looked away. He nodded, nodding his fingers at Daria. I'm not likely to be of much use to you here, he answered honestly. Maybe the phone number of the owners? Oh no, it's definitely not a phone number. There are too few digits. Thomas suggested that perhaps it was his personal number, but an identifier, especially since he was branded on his stomach. Well, Valerie stretched out. I don't think so. To identify this or that animal, he is implanted with a chip. You know yourself. And the number on a piece of paper? Maybe someone is doing it, but in my practice, it has never happened. I see, answered Daria. It's a pity you don't know. I guess I've been giving these numbers so much importance for nothing. I suppose so. What's his branding? Daria shrugged her shoulders. Now she was stinging her hand along the inside of the counter, trying to find her smartphone. Yep, here it is now showing a picture of the branding. She rummaged through the pictures for a long time, trying to find a picture of the branding that flaunted on Rio's belly button. She was sure she'd taken a picture of it, but it seemed she'd been mistaken. Thomas Picks, Rio blurry pictures, meter readings, and there was still no branding. No sign of it. Daria shook her head. I can't find it. Just show me a picture of the dog. I'll tell you the breed. Right. Daria returned to her phone and proudly turned the screen to the doctor. Martin looked at the picture for a long time. He glanced uncertainly at Daria's receptionist. Are you sure this dog was abandoned? The woman smiled sadly. But of course, at least it looked that way. Why, it's an Irish setter. Raised his eyebrows, Doctor the hunting breed. If it has a pedigree, which it probably does, judging by the branding, it's a very expensive dog, dear. Anna frowned. But who would leave an expensive puppy on the highway? It would be better to sell it. And why did they buy it at all? It's ridiculous. She brushed it off, and I'll tell you who would. A doctor leaning on the counter. Someone with a lot of money. I don't know what kind of idiots they are. But apparently there are some Irish authors who are very intelligent and very active in nature. Such a breed should be practiced ideally. Go hunting. But you're hardly a hunter. Huntress. Right? Oh, what a hunt. Daria laughed. I don't know anything about it at all. She hesitated. Setter so no. I assumed he was a thoroughbred. But what's so expensive? What kind? The doctor nodded confidently. You know, what if you could show me the branding sometime? We could find the kennel, and then we could find the owners. Maybe he wasn't dumped at all. Maybe he was just lost. But no, the owner said firmly. I love our Rio, and my Thomas loves him to bits. Suppose we find the owners. And then what? I won't give him away. Do you know? Martin smiled. It's an interesting situation. Good afternoon. Sorry I'm late. A girl appeared in the doorway of the veterinary clinic. Guilty, looking at the doctor. In her hands was a small carryall, and sticking out of the small window was the face of a Yorkshire Terrier. Can you still see us? Sure. The vet nodded and gestured toward his office. Come with me, please. Daria smiled involuntarily at the sight of the doggie in her socks. She suddenly remembered that her son was waiting for her at home and very dirty. After a long walk the dog that Thomas would hardly be able to wash well by himself, Daria thought for a moment. As Valera said, did she ask herself or her sisters? Daria, the breed of dog. Her thoughts continued to revolve around the information she had just received. But really, what difference does it make how much a pet costs if it's part of your family? It could be an expensive and pedigreed dog or just a mongrel. Now Daria. It was even scary to imagine that she could give up their four-legged friend in favor of money. Daria called her son once more, asking how they were doing with the attempt, and looked at the calendar on the city streets. It was going to be a real spring. The snow was almost all melted. The air smelled of both earth and fragrance, and the awakening life-hunting dogs needed more movement. She thought and decided it was time to open the dacha season. David had no apartment of her own, but there was an old shabby house outside the city. She had bought it from a colleague, back when Thomas was a baby. The young mother decided that the child definitely needs fresh air, and she, in turn, her own real estate, taking a loan, which, by the way, she still has not fully paid off. She became a homeowner in the winter on this daughter was impossible to be on this house. No heating. But in the summer, it was so beautiful. And in the spring, of course, it was nice too. Having decided that it was high time to start going to the country house, Daria immediately informed Thomas about the upcoming trip, and with joy in her heart started to wait for the weekend. By Friday evening, the whole family, including the dog, arrived at the cottage. Daria got out of the car first to open the gate. Thomas, along with Rio, remained seated inside for the time being. The woman got out of the car, looking around. She took a deep breath of the fresh, already slightly warm in air. "It's beautiful," Daria said aloud. She opened the old gate to park the car inside the lot, got back behind the wheel. When the car pulled inside and the gate was closed again, the mother nodded her head to her son as a sign that they could get out of the car. "Just be careful with hers," she warned. "Yep," replied the boy and opened the door wide at the same second. As if at the speed of light, an excited dog jumped out of the car. For a couple of minutes, he secured the territory, and then, contrary to the expectations of his mistress, sagged, and Plasteski lightning fast passed and bent under the closed wickets. "Rio, stop." He ran after the dog, shouted the frustrated Daria, "Stop, to whom I say stop." But the infatuated dog did not even turn around at the call of his mistress. He with amazing grace maneuvered among the bare bushes and put piles of snow, deftly jumping over large puddles, tired from running. Daria stopped and looked angrily after Rio's pets, as if guided by an invisible thread, definitely running towards his goal. But Daria had no way of knowing what that goal was. She panted and chased after the tireless hunter again. After all, he had almost disappeared from her sight. Eventually, the restless Rio led her to a wide field. There he, in spite of the fact that almost up to his chest, fell into the snowdrifts. With incredible speed, he flew into the bushes and picked up a large flock of large birds unknown to Daria. The birds noisily beat their wings and flew into the air at once. Rio finally stopped, mesmerized, watching the game. Also watching the birds, mesmerized, was Daria herself, as beautifully as it came out of her mouth. She shifted her gaze to the psoriasis and "Get over here already." The dog looked at his mistress with an expectant gaze. He seemed to be waiting for something. He tilted his head to the side. There was disappointment in his gaze. It was as if he was telling her, "Well, what about you?" Daria took a step toward Rio's dog. "It's time to go home." The dog only barked unhappily in response. Daria, however, continued to slowly approach the dog to grab the prankster by the collar and lead him home. "Why are you so eager to catch those birds?" she asked him. "Of course he does." Suddenly, a rough male voice came from behind her. Daria flinched, turned around, and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching her, a large gun dangling from his shoulder. He was wearing a camouflage suit and thigh-high boots. The stranger smiled broadly as he approached. "You don't have an ordinary dog, but a real hunter," he said. "You don't have to feed a dog like that. Just let him pick up the game. And from the looks of it, you have a fine specimen. I envy you," he said, coming almost right up to the woman. I know," she said, embarrassed. "But I'm not a hunter at all." She smiled guiltily. "So my friend will have to run home as soon as possible. I think it's getting dark." The man opened his eyes wide. "Really?" He stretched out in surprise. "Such a dog should definitely go hunting. I'm telling you this as a hunter with experience. And otherwise, why did you get this breed? Would you have gotten a Chihuahua? For example, sensing the irony, Daria rolled her eyes resentfully. I didn't get that particular breed on purpose. I didn't know when I found the baby that he was such a catch. She looked at Rio and stroked his head affectionately. At the same time, the dogs sniffed the clothes of the man who approached them. It turned out he was sniffing something very interesting to him. Did you find it surprising? Asked the man. How so? It's a red Irish setter. Such dogs are not on the road. They are not only expensive, but also rare. How come you didn't know? They are. Laughing, replied Daria. My son and I found it on the road. Somebody left a baby on the side of the road. Dumped a little puppy. It wasn't far from here, by the way. We were just on our way back from the cottage. That can't be. The man replied indignantly. What kind of owners are these? You know, I know the owner of the kennel that breeds these beauties. That man would never, ever sell his puppy to anyone he didn't know. He well selects new owners for his dogs, even conducts various checks and tests. And here it is. I'm totally shocked. He continued to be indignant. How is it? Daria replied in a quiet voice. I guess I'll go now, it's getting dark. Wait. The hunter wanted to take the girl's hand, but stopped, deciding that such a movement would be indecent. What is your name? Daria replied, smiling. Lovely name, answered the man, my favorite since Daria, the goddess of the hunt. She laughed warmly in response. What is your name? Daniel? You can just call me Dan. He smiled. You said you had a house here. Perhaps we could see each other again. I'd introduce you to the owner of the kennel I told you about. He would tell you a lot more about this breed than I think we could meet. Embarrassed, Daria replied. She raised her head and looked carefully into the hunter's eyes. The color of his eyes fascinated her. Blue, bright, like a clear spring sky. We live over there. She pointed with her hand in the direction of her dacha. The plots are numbered. Ours is the third. Come by tomorrow evening, for example. I've taken a few days off work, interviewed my son at school. We'll be here for at least a week. Daniel got a look. I can't tonight. The best time to hunt birds is right around sunrise or sunset. Like now, for example. He smiled broadly. By the way, I was just walking toward the pond. Take a good look. Maybe you could let your dog go for a good run with me, and then I'll bring him back to you. Daria thought about the duck. No, not at all. He put his hands up. You can't shoot ducks now, only Seleznev. He shifted his gaze to the dog that had not killed his leg so far. You know, I think your dog is all for it. He doesn't need to be trained. I've seen him pick up birds. I think he can do it. What do you think? The landlady, of course, was going to refuse such an offer. However, the man's beautiful eyes made it very difficult, this answer option. Of course, she didn't know at all. She didn't know who he was, didn't know what to expect from him. What if he stole her? She scrutinized the man, then shifted her gaze to Rio. She thought about it. Sorry, but no, she still refused to Daria, and she wished she could say yes. She wanted her dog to do what he was supposed to do, but fear for her pet overpowered her. I don't know you at all. Fair enough. Daniel smiled broadly. In that case, you and I will have time to get to know each other. Daria started, and I hope she spent a few more long seconds, looking at the man with confusion. There was something about him that tugged at the delicate strings of her soul. There was in him a masculinity, a bravery of undeniable strength, and even nobility. Daria was too shy to ask her new acquaintance how old he was, but she guessed that he was older than her, but not by much. Daria had never really thought about hunting as a hobby. It was a hobby. It always seemed barbaric to her, not modern. It's one thing to buy meat to make dinner for your family, and quite another when it's just entertainment, killing for fun. It made her cringe. All in all, she didn't quite know how she should feel about such a sport. Nor had she known any hunters until now. But Daniel seemed a good-natured man, interesting and intelligent. Mommy screamed, Thomas, Mammy, where did you go? The boy ran out of the house when he saw his mother through the window. I thought something was wrong. Oh, Thomas, I'm sorry. Mom grabbed her head. I didn't realize you'd be so worried. And I didn't get a chance to come back earlier. Of course I will. What happened? Where did he run off to? The boy was right next to Rio. examining him from different angles. "Kid, are you okay?" he asked, putting the flask of his favorite dog with his head. "It's all right. Don't worry," reassured the mother to her son. Walked up to Thomas and kissed him on the top of his head. Rio chased the birds as usual. Thomas laughed warmly. He must think he'll take off on his own one day. Where was he in the field? Do you remember when we used to walk there in the summer? And we met someone. Who? Thomas asked in surprise with one uncle. Telling about Dan, Daria was momentarily embarrassed he was a hunter. He said that our Rio is also a born hunter. That's why he chases pigeons in the park. Even offered to take our Rio hunting. But I refused. I don't know this man to hunt yet. The boy's eyes rounded with delight. Shit, Mom, why did you say no? Rio, alas, was a real tough dog and would have caught us a bear. Daria laughed, but not a bear, but a duck, maybe. I actually like duck. By the way, it's been a long time since you cooked Putin, and the legs. Thomas hugged the dog once more and then rose to his feet. He folded his arms across his chest with a smart look. Or maybe I want to go hunting too, he said suddenly. Asked this uncle. Maybe he'll take me too. Surprised, his mother splashed her hands. Honey, I told you, I don't know him at all. How can I give him Rio and trust you? Maybe, sure, but later. But Mom. The boy was indignant and, calling the dog with him, walked deep into the lot. A few hours after the unexpected encounter, Daria and her family were walking slowly along the plots, looking around carefully. During this time, she had already managed to sort out all the things they had brought with them to clean the house. After the long winter, when all the chores were done, the family went out for an evening walk with Rio. The dog made a careful detour all around, every now and then, listening to something that apparently only he could hear every now, and then the dog would freeze in place on you in his dangling ears. And sometimes he would get into a stance as if preparing to jump, noticing something that Rio was ready to lunge at. Daria would stand too, spreading her legs wide so she wouldn't fall. When the dog had done all his business and Thomas and his mom were about to walk toward the house, an attentive Rio froze in place and then tore off with such force that Daria couldn't keep the leash in her hands. Rio, what on earth are you going to do, Rio? Shouted. She ran after the dog to her mom. Stop, suddenly Thomas shouted. I'll catch up with him myself. With these words, the boy ran forward. Daria stopped abruptly. How grown up is he? She thought, watching Thomas. So independent. Thinking so, she headed in the direction her son and the dog had run off in. After a few turns, Daria noticed an unusual sight. There in the distance stood her Thomas, actively gesticulating with his hands and telling something to an unfamiliar man. A mother's heart skipped a few beats. Who the hell is that? She managed to think. Concerned mommy quickened her step, trying to get to her desired destination as quickly as possible, coming closer. She exhaled with relief. Standing next to Thomas was Daniel. The sight she saw made her heart beat faster and her cheeks visibly redden. Her son looked at his companion with a look of delight. Her favorite dog was circling nearby. Now and then jumped on Dania and pawed his clothes with dirty paws. Suddenly a thought popped into David's head. She liked Daniel. He looked so harmonious, so attentive to little Thomas. He could probably replace a father to a child. And Thomas has never had a male role model. He has no one but me, she thought wistfully. Daria put on her most welcoming smile, fixed her hair, and moved forward. Daniel, nice to meet you, she said, stepping closer. Daria, good evening. The hunter smiled broadly. I don't mind using the first name. I've already met your son. Why didn't you tell me he wanted to go hunting? I'd love to take Thomas with me. Oh, but Daria's embarrassed. How did you know he was my son? How do you two look alike? The man looked from David to Thomas and back again. I recognized your dog right away. He patted her on the head. He's a real hunter. He smelled game right away. Daria, please let him go out in the field. And Thomas too. I could use some help, yes. Daria smiled faintly, lowered her gaze. Only now did she notice that a bag filled with game lay beside the man. It was immediately clear to her why Rio was so abashed at the new acquaintance. The expression on her face changed noticeably, which didn't go unnoticed by the tribute. "Dariet is all right," he asked. Then he followed the look. "Womano, I'm sorry. I didn't offer you a fresh bird, did I? I'm not offering you a fresh bird now, of course. I have to butcher it first, but I'll be sure to bring you a mount tomorrow." "Isn't it great?" asked the educated boy. "Just today, I asked my mom to cook a duck," he told Daniel. Dan smiled and winked at Daria. "By the way, how about this? I'll take Rio and Thomas hunting with me, and in return, I'll give you half of the spoils." Daria looked down at him and looked at him again. "I don't mind." Finally, she answered. "When will you go hunting next time?" "At dawn." He thought for a while. "I propose this option. Tomorrow morning, Thomas and I, and to hunt. And in the evening, I'll invite you to my place, cook what we catch, and you'll take your share, of course." I don't know if she's thinking about tomorrow so soon. "But Mom, please." Thomas stretched out pitifully. Dan supported him. "Please, please," he smiled. Rio sat down on the ground and touched his mistress' paws demandingly. "But okay," Daria laughed and waved her hand and agreed. The next morning, Dan, taking Thomas and Rio with him, went hunting. The boy was absolutely thrilled with this pastime. All the next day, he talked about the birds he had caught, about hunting in general, and about Daniel. In the evening, the family came to visit the hunter and tasted the taste of the lower heavens. This was how Daria and her new acquaintances came to an agreement. She would allow her son and Rio to go out into the field with the man. In return, he would treat them to fresh meat. Daria sometimes wondered if it was me who owed him. Thomas is so happy, busy doing what he loves, but she wouldn't admit it to a man. Still, she enjoyed spending time with the hunter. Of course, their communication was not limited to this arrangement. The young people often went for walks together. Thomas and Rio would run ahead, and they would follow. Talking about everything, Daria could not admit to herself that she liked this guy. Her previous relationships had left a deep scar in her soul, but it was hard to go against her own feelings. And it was obvious that Daria liked him too, or even more so. They could talk for hours. They could walk without getting tired. The girl often noticed how the young man looked at her, how he looked into her eyes. Such moments turned everything inside her upside down. She wanted to scream, "But kiss me at last," but she remained silent. Danny, on the other hand, was very modest. Maybe he was afraid Daria wouldn't reciprocate. Or maybe he was afraid of ruining their relationship by being too hasty. In the end, each of them knew exactly what the other liked, but no one dared to take the next step. Toward the end of the week, as David and Thomas' unplanned vacation came to an end, they decided to stop by Dan's house to say goodbye. Upon learning that his new friends were leaving, Daniel was very upset, even though he had already planned to return to the city in the next few days. After some thought, he suggested that next weekend they go to a different place together. Fresh air, hunting, a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. As it turned out, he knew some good places he'd been renting for years. Daria was nervous, but agreed to stay with the man, to sleep in the same house. She both wanted what it could lead to and was afraid at the same time. At the same time, the following actions were taking place in a completely different place. The notary, who was also a close friend of the late Anthony. Frowning his eyebrows, gazing into the monitor, he ruffled his hair, stood up abruptly from his chair, then, after thinking, sat back down. "So what's all the fidgeting about?" he asked. "How much longer do we have to wait for patience?" "Sebastian, now we will see everything," in a level tone replied the assistant. After the day Kelly had come to see him for the last time, Sebastian thought deeply. He couldn't figure out what had put the idea in his head. But it was clear to him as day that the lady was hiding something. He couldn't figure out what, and there was essentially no clue, unless you counted the very personality of this Kelly a nasty, vile, and obviously very evil woman. Sebastian was almost certain. She was definitely hiding something. It was time to think about it. The notary decided to question the deceased's entourage, not friends or relatives, but servants and subordinates. He asked very unusual and even strange questions without asking a word about Georgie, his death, or his inheritance. He asked each of them only one thing: who Kelly was, according to his interlocutor. What is she as a person? The servants spat when they heard that name. The subordinates hid their eyes in shame. One thing was clear: nobody liked the lady. Intuition did not fail here. Then Sebastian, thinking long and hard about further actions, went for a trick from the security guard who worked at his friend's house. He found out that there were surveillance cameras all around the perimeter of the property, as well as in the house itself. He found out that they had been installed over 12 years ago, just when Kelly had cheated on Anthony. Sebastian had also known about this fact for a long time from the cheating husband himself. As it turned out, the cameras were tiny, inconspicuous, and Kelly was unaware of them. The only thing left to do was to get the records from the date of Anthony's death and see if there was anything suspicious that day. For the past hour, Sebastian and his assistant Benjamin had been going through the camera footage. They scrutinized every corner of the large property, but nothing suspicious had happened. Then they started to look at the footage from the house, but there was nothing there either. When the lawyers had almost given up hope, thinking that they would never find anything, they noticed the strange behavior of the couple in the living room. The very moment when Anthony brought the dog into the house, when the couple began to quarrel. And now the woman ran off to her bedroom, and the worried husband followed her. There they are in the bedroom. There's the bastard, pretending to sob. And then, oh my God, look, shouted out the worried Ben. This is the moment of death. With a lump in his throat, he said. Yes, quietly whispered to Sebastian's assistant. What they saw shocked them. Sebastian was right. She was the one to blame for his friend's death. She was the one who hadn't called an ambulance for him in time. That was it. Kelly be damned. Sebastian rose sharply to his feet, but she would pay for this. He said harshly. But Chief, who gets the inheritance then? The aide asked gently. I don't care who. The main thing is that I will do everything I can to make sure that this woman gets a fair punishment for the death of my friend. And Daria, Dan, Thomas, and Rio came to the country. Dan had rented a beautiful, spacious hunting lodge deep in a centuries-old forest. The young hunter had made sure everything went smoothly in advance. He chose a suitable house for rent, bought the necessary groceries, and didn't forget to bring some treats for Rio and extra gear for Thomas this weekend. Dan, though he tried not to show it, wasn't hoping for flying prey. He wanted Daria to be his true friend. Arriving at the appointed place, the woman began to carefully arrange her things. Dan, standing next to her, looked at her with loving eyes. Maybe later, he asked, smiling. Now let's go to the forest, and soon Thomas and I will go hunting. Well, Oscar will wait, Daria asked, laughing. What the hell is that? But things also, laughing, he replied. Things can be sorted out later. I would help you with that. Right now we need to assess the terrain. Thomas, Rio, you to the window. Let's go. The baby and the dog jumped happily in place. The whole company left the house. They walked slowly, measuredly. Every now and then Danila stopped to look around, and Rio followed him, sniffing every bush carefully. I would never have noticed, the girl said, pointing her head at another trail. But you're so attentive, you see everything. By the way, whose trail is this? A boar? Answered Dan. And then he raised his eyebrows in surprise. Because right behind him, someone's voice synchronously answered David's question. A huge boar. The older man, unfamiliar to her, repeated cheerfully. Daniel, nice to meet you. Also came Spring. Benjamin, the hunter, took the confident step towards him and shook the hand of the acquaintance firmly. That's what a professional means. No animal can hear you. You move so stealthily. Benjamin smiled, it's all experience. He shifted his gaze to Daria. I'm so glad you'll come to your senses. How beautiful is your wife, he said. Daria blushed, and Daniel coughed embarrassedly. It's not me. Why did he come to you? His comrade interrupted him. I don't remember you being here. I think that dog is mine. Where did you buy this handsome dog? Did you get off the street? An owl? What kind? Oh, he's so handsome. He rubbed the backs of those who didn't resist at all. Rio. Oh my. Is it a good thing we met you? I forgot I promised Daria. Dan looked at his companion. Meet Benjamin, owner of the best kennel of red Irish sweaters. Remember I told you about him? Eh? Hello, the beautiful girl smiled and extended her hand. I'm Daria, and this is my son Thomas. I didn't buy this dog, you know. I found him on the highway. Somebody threw him out when he was just a baby. That Benjamin seemed so lazy. What kind of nonsense is that? It can't be. Daria shrugged. Maybe you and I found our Rio on the way back from the cottage. Was it like that? Stop impolitely. Rio's kennel owner interrupted her. Is that really our Rio de Janeiro? He was bought from me by a good man, also a hunter. Unfortunately, he died. It can't be the same dog you have. He still has his owner. Benjamin unceremoniously approached the dog, ordered him to lie down. The man's stern and confident voice convinced the dog not to show off, but to obey the command. Probably it was the result of years of experience with dogs. Or maybe Rio realized something when the breeder scrutinized his belly. He almost jumped with surprise. This is indeed the branding of my kennel. Where did you say you found it? And Daria, together with Thomas, once again told the story of how they met Rio on the road. Benjamin's eyes grew sterner, his eyebrows furrowed sternly. After listening, he said menacingly, did Kelly get rid of the puppy after Anthony died? No, she'd always been a peculiar woman, of course, but not like that. His eyes went blank. His expression was one of utter disappointment. I've always been so careful about choosing owners. I wanted my dogs to live with decent people, and now this. We're decent people, too. Little Thomas interjected into the conversation. The older man smiled affectionately at him. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad Rio has found a new family. Of course, and I can see you're taking good care of him. But the way Kelly's been acting, I'm gonna go over there and find out. I'm sorry, folks. I gotta go. Dan, I'll call you back. With that, the kennel owner walked away with a quick stride. That's how it is, isn't it? He shuffled from foot to foot in embarrassment. Why is he going to see Laura? Asked Daria, starting to get visibly nervous. Why does he want our dog back? Not giving it back is our dog Daria. It's okay. The guy calmed her down. You don't have to worry so much. Yeah, Mom, don't worry. This guy seems cool. He won't do that. I hope not, the woman said quietly. It was night. The company had already returned from the hunt, having caught a lot of game. Thomas ate a hearty dinner and went to bed on the second floor, while Rio quietly suggested the spacious recliners in the corner. Daria sat in front of the fireplace, putting her hands to the fire, and the dialogue with Benjamin did not come out of her head. What will happen now? She wondered. What if this Kelly wanted Rio back? She was snapped out of her musings by a gentle touch on her shoulder and the low voice of a tribute. Are you worried about everything? Yes, I am, she confirmed, realizing that it was unlikely that a man like Benjamin would bring the dog back alive. But suddenly she looked up sharply and only now realized how close Dan was to her. Her head spun, her fingertips began to prick, and she wanted to pull away, shying away from the unnecessary closeness. But the beauty of Dan's eyes so mesmerized her that she was unable to move. The scent that emanated from the hunter's dura beckoned piney, subtle notes. He literally smelled like a forest, a woody odor and the smell of gunpowder. She shifted her gaze from his eyes to his lips. It's like I can feel the change coming, she said in a whisper. So do I, Dan answered. And unable to hold back any longer, she pressed her lips to his. His kiss was so tender. He seemed to stop breathing, afraid of offending the girl of his dreams, when he gently pulled away. Daria, on the other hand, took the initiative. From that very night, the couple became one and never parted again. A few days later, the young people, overwhelmed with happiness, could not think of anything else. They could not get enough of each other's company. Every day the couple spent together, and the thought of parting for a moment drove them crazy. One similar morning, Daniel, who was self-employed and free from strict schedules, invited Daria to a cafe to have breakfast together. When the couples were already brought the menu and they started to choose their meals, Daniel's cell phone suddenly rang. Who is it? Daria asked carefully. Something important. It can't wait. Let's see. Daniel pulled his smartphone out of his pocket. Benjamin is calling. Suddenly the hunter said, "If you want, I won't answer it." Benjamin is the owner of the kennel. She is interested, pitched forward. Answer it quickly. Suddenly he's already gone to see the woman. Dan shrugged his shoulders and answered the phone. As the conversation progressed, the expression on his face changed. After many minutes, he finally hung up the phone and looked at his beloved seriously. "So what's the impatience there?" she asked. "Speak rather differently. I will go crazy." No, Daria. No one is taking your dog," said Dan. "It's Kelly. I think she's going to do time." "What? Why?" Daria immediately calmed down about Rio. "So that's the profile of Rio's ex-mistress, huh?" "Yeah, a normal person would never do something like that." "So what did she do?" "I think she killed her own husband." After saying those words, the man finally exhaled. And I knew him. Or rather, I'd crossed paths with him a couple times while hunting. This man, Anthony, knew my father well. When Benjamin told me that a good friend of his had died, I didn't realize it was about him. He was a good, soulful man. "I'm so sorry." Daria took his hand, but how did she kill him? Technically, she didn't kill him. He had a heart attack, and she didn't call an ambulance. She stood by and watched him die, waiting until he was beyond saving. This was all recorded by hidden CCTV cameras. Shortly before he died, Anthony bought it from Benjamin. And a couple months before that, his faithful and old dog died. And he took it very hard. It was as if Anthony sensed something. By the same day, he picked up Rio. He went to a notary and made a will about his wife's failure to provide care. It was his notary who found out. They were friends. He sensed something too, and started digging up Kelly. Now she's in custody, and she's facing real time. "How awful," Daria replied quietly. "But how did Benjamin know all this from that notary? By the way, he said that we should visit his office." Daniel frowned, puzzled. "I didn't understand why, though, did I? It's really strange." Daria confirmed his words. "But since it's my day off today, maybe we could go right away." "Do you know the address?" "I do. Let's go," Dan said. And with his hand, he invited the waiter to serve the bill. Half an hour later, they were at the right place. Getting out of the car, Daria looked around the neighborhood while they called someone, arranging to be admitted. A couple minutes later, an assistant notary appeared in the lobby of the office. A young guy named Benjamin. He smiled intriguingly when he saw the client and invited them in. On the threshold of his office, Sebastian was already waiting for them. Very satisfied and even happy. "Good afternoon." He greeted them. "I hope you had a good trip. How may I address you?" Daria answered the visitors, embarrassed. "And this is Daniel, my friend." "Nice to meet you, Daria." He repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it. "Daria is a beautiful name, the goddess of the hunt. You knew that, didn't you?" "My late client had a passion for hunting like nothing else in this world." "Tell me, did you know the late Anthony?" "No," the woman answered. "I did, but unfortunately not as well as I would have liked." "My father knew him well," Daniel added. "Great, great." Sebastian opened the door of his office wide, inviting the young men in. He pressed a small button on the landline phone and asked the receptionist to bring everyone coffee with lemon or milk. As if deliberately delaying the time, he asked, "Sebastian, don't take this the wrong way, but why did you invite us?" He asked Daniel straight in the forehead. The notary smiled enigmatically. "Good question. Please sit down. The fact is that my late client and dear friend made a very unusual will, as he had no children or other relatives. He decided that when he died, his estate would go to someone who shared his life views and values. Of course, he was married, but you already know what his wife did." He cast a bitter glance around the audience and continued, seeing the sympathy on the faces of his interlocutors. Many people thought Anthony was strange and unloved. That was partly true, but he was a kind man, very intelligent, and thought that dogs were much better than people. You're probably wondering why he didn't leave a will for his wife, because he knew who she really was. Yeah, he didn't divorce her. He had a soft, heartfelt pity, but he always knew she was only in it for the money. So when he began to feel his days were coming to an end, he decided to leave this unusual will. Before his death, he had bought an expensive hunting dog, but since he assumed that he might soon give his soul to God, he decided to take care of his new friend and who would shelter him in case of his master's death. After all, as you've realized, he knew that his spouse would by no means deal with the puppy. Really, he had no idea how nasty she'd be, so concluded the notary. I am now going to read you his will. It sounds like this. He took out of the safe a document on colored watermarked letterhead and read aloud all my property, wherever it may be and in whatever form it may consist, which will belong to me at the time of my death, including my house, bank deposits, and the like, shall go to the person who provides proof that my Brazilian is in good standing. Also, that person must name the V6 and the code. That Sebastian looked carefully at his interlocutors. The number, if you wish, 6 digits. Do you think you know someone who could claim this inheritance? A Brazilian? Daria said the strange words quietly. That's our Rio, our dog, an Irish setter. Rio's full name is Rio de Janeiro. Yes, Sebastian smiled contentedly. That's right. We're talking about a red Irish setter dog. Really, we'll have to establish that the dog is exactly what we need. As you probably know, he must have a chip with a unique number. As for the numerical code, I think you should know that as well. And I think I do know, Daria said thoughtfully. She frowned a little, remembering the thing that had kept her busy for so long, exactly the number. I know that number. Joyfully, she replied. Literally the very next day, Daria and Rio were on their way to the examination to present the proof for the notary. A panel of reputable veterinarians, smiling, determined that this dog was indeed very well looked after. A little later, Daria, going through her jewelry box, found the right code. The same numerical code that she and Thomas had found in the capsule that hung on little Rio's collar. Thus, Daria received an incredible inheritance, a huge house, and a large sum of money. It's a small apartment, Kelly's left behind. Unfortunately, or fortunately, she never needed it. She had already been using another service apartment for several weeks in one of the colonies of the Federal Penitentiary Service of the Federal Penitentiary Service. Daria and Daniel got married a few months later. At first, Dan did not want to move into Anthony's house. He was embarrassed that his bride had such a large dowry. But what won't you do for the one you love? Most of the money Daria had invested in the organization of shelters for homeless animals. After all, he was already earning well. And the rest she put aside for the education and future of her children. Why children? Because she already had a new little heart beating under her heart. Soon Thomas had a little sister, and then another. Rio wasn't without gifts either. One early fall morning, he was thrilled to find a little redhead in the yard. She was very shy and trembling, hiding her slender tail between her hind legs. But Rio's alert cavalier quickly explained to her that no one would ever hurt her here. Every hunting season since then, Daria, tangled in a warm plaid, usually stood on the veranda for a long time, holding a hot cup of steaming coffee, and looking after her most beloved and closest in this life, a tall, well-built, blue-eyed man to his young companion, a teenager, and 2 cheerful, gusty Irish senators, hot as fire and bright as the low sun rising on the forests.